Thank you everyone for joining us. This is one step of what we hope to be a very engaging and democratic process. And I'd like to thank the candidate for taking the time to come and join us to answer some questions directly. Just for our members who are joining us, I'd like to do a quick overview of what comes next in the process following the candidate Q&As. Steering committee will then host a chapter-wide meeting where we'll go through the candidates who are seeking endorsement once more and have member debate. There are also opportunities for member debate via the chapter Slack and throughout the process, but that at that point will be an opportunity for a structured discussion. An open vote online ballot will afterwards be sent to members that will allow everyone to vote on the endorsement, with each race considered individually with a 60% threshold using an STV method. Up front, my name is Tim Hart. I use he, him pronouns. I am one of the co-chairs of Twin City DSA's electoral committee, and we are joined here today by Cam Gordon, City Council member for Ward 2, who is running for re-election. Cam, if you would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you very much. So yep, that's right, I'm Cam Gordon. I'm running for City Council member for Ward 2. It's really been my honor and privilege to represent the people of Ward 2 in Minneapolis in the past, and I'm really honored that I am being considered for endorsement from with Twin Cities DSA. Really appreciate the work. I actually consider DSA as a real sign of hope for our country. I think we've been in serious trouble, especially the way our capitalist structure has been going, probably for a long time, but especially maybe in the last 20 or 30 years, where it seems we've really lost our way and we've convinced ourselves as a people that somehow seeking profit is the ultimate. And by having these conversations we're having today, and having groups like Democratic Socialists of America come forward, they're helping us to question those things and to think about really what is of value and what is important. I think we have to change capitalism as we know it, and we have to change it by democratizing it, if you will, by creating a real participatory, democratically controlled economic system where community benefits and building a nurturing society have higher priorities than making money. And we're not really there yet. And I have to say, government's big job, as far as I see it, is doing that and is actually controlling capitalism in many ways. Many of the things I do on the city council and we do in city government is trying to wrestle with and grapple with kind of an out of control market and market forces that are driving us in decisions that aren't for the common good and aren't for the public welfare. And I think that's, we absolutely need to reverse course, and we need to work together to do so. It's been my honor and privilege to be able to do that on many different fronts and work on many different issues, including the minimum wage, including looking at what we can do to expand public housing and many other things, I think, that are saying we're going to get involved in these issues, maybe where people would say government shouldn't be involved or city government shouldn't be so involved, but we got involved and it's made a big difference. I mean, minimum wage is a great example, but I look forward to more discussion. I don't want to take the whole, I might partly want to take the whole hour to talk, but I don't think that's smart or it's in our best interest. So I'm going to open it up and make sure there's time for as many questions as people have.
So as far as the format, first off, thank you for the introduction. We'll begin with some pre-submitted questions. I'd invite the audience to make use of the Q&A function to submit questions that occur to them, and we will turn to those in the second half. I have some supplemental ones in the event that there is a lull in questions being submitted. I would just say pointed questions are okay, but please keep questions comradely and in good faith, and if possible, keep them brief so that it doesn't take too long to ask, or I don't need to summarize them. And with that, first question, Cam. What would you like to see done with the former site of the 3rd precinct? Do you feel it should have police return to it, or should it be put to some other use?
I don't think the best use would be police returning to it. I would certainly be then open to other uses. The part that I really want to stress, though, is I really want to see there's some kind of process and some kind of community process, and even community-led and driven process to help determine what it should be. Because there's many different views and many different opinions. I know there's going to be a lot of pressure on the city side, probably our property services and staff and the department, and thinking, well, this is a great city property. It was built for a certain function. We should be able to use it to serve some city functions. But I actually think the police station model that it would use to build that is a thing of the past that we're probably going to be moving away from quickly, and probably should be moving away from. And I think there's going to be a lot of ideas about what could happen there. In fact, I've had lots of conversations with people in the ward about it already. I will say that most of the businesses nearby don't want to see it open as a police precinct again, and many of the residents don't either. There are ideas that it could be a business incubator. There are ideas that it could be a civil rights museum. And I think at this point, it's not my appropriate role to think about what Cam Gordon thinks it should be, but how could I, as an elected official and as somebody in government, help facilitate that process and be a voice for the people there so that we could have the conversation and find what is the best use, what is the consensus, and maybe there's multi-uses there as well.
Thank you. Next question we have. What are 3 policy goals that you would have over the next city council term?
There probably is quite a few policy goals, but I think there's 3 that I could lift up, maybe above the others. One of the things I think we're on the cusp of is some major changes to how we do public safety in our city. I think one of my policy goals is to see us actualize those changes. I am part of the effort to create a new Department of Public Safety. I want to see that happen, and I want to see it have a more holistic and public health approach to how we do safety. And it includes a lot more than law enforcement. And I think we're on our path for doing that, but there's a lot more we could do. And there's even a lot of policies underneath that we could work out and work on. Part of that is going to have to include what alternatives do we have out there for armed police taking care of so many issues. And I think we're already building some of those out. And I think we have great opportunities to do that. I'm also out as a second policy priority of mine is what are we going to do to address the housing crisis? I think there's lots of actions that we can take, and we're on a path to take those. I think there's actually some things that we may not get to by the end of this term that we'll need to get to next term, including the tenant opportunity to purchase ordinance that I'm working on and leading on, which is something that they have in other cities in the United States, including Washington, D.C., where when a property goes up for sale that's a rental property, the tenants have an opportunity to purchase that and live in it. Often they form cooperatives. That's some of the best models. And I think that we can be there to help support that effort and help support them forming cooperatives. But beyond that, there's also a rent stabilization or a rent control charter amendment that I am the lead on and put on the ballot. Will be on the ballot. It's right now going to the Charter Commission for review, but we know that we have it there in time. So it will be going on the ballot as long as we can keep the votes on the council to get it there. That's actually a multi-step process. So even if it passes on the ballot, we'll still then have to implement that specific policy once we have the authority, because the way the state law is written, we need local authority granted at a general election before we can enact any rent control in the city of Minneapolis. The third big policy initiative that I'm working on, which is also probably bringing lots of other policies together, is a Minneapolis Green New Deal, so to speak. I think that's what we can call it, and that's what it can actually be. I think we have a real opportunity right now in the city with some of the work we've done already in clarifying our clean energy vision. We've developed a clean energy partnership, so we have the utilities at the table, but that's helped us focus some of our issues and bring things forward. We have a climate action plan now. We have also, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but we've also separated our franchise fee from the franchise agreement. And we now have a fund to invest in green initiatives that we've created through that, and also through using a pollution tax that we can put on polluters. And we as a city have declared climate change an emergency. And we've also identified a social or a full cost of carbon. So I think we have an opportunity now to raise revenue through those franchise fees and pollution taxes, and then reinvest that in a way so we can address the environmental injustices of the past in our city. Because we've also identified green zones in our city where we identify environmental injustices have historically been occurring. And so I see this as a fantastic way that we could create more jobs and also be reducing the cost of energy for people, cleaning up our air, cleaning up our water, and doing our part to fight climate change. So I really think those three initiatives are significant and would be priorities for me to work on in my next term.
Thank you. The next question we have refers to something from the questionnaire you submitted. You mentioned in there that you were the only council member to have publicly spoken out against the RAD and Section 18 programs. The question then is, why did you end up voting in favor of the subsequent resolution and memorandum of understanding, which allowed the Housing Authority to implement the RAD and Section 18 programs?
One of the things I remember about that MOU was that the land would be held by the city and wasn't part of that. And that was one of the things that really convinced me that there was a safeguard there. The other thing I think was being referred to is a resolution that laid out some of the requirements and some of the expectations on that. I think there were some safeguards. Looking back, perhaps I should have opposed that resolution. There was one line in there that had to do, I can't remember the word now that was used in the resolution, but did create this little opening saying that the city was all right and supported some kind of conversions like this in there. But I saw that resolution as generally neutral and didn't necessarily mean we were going to take those actions.
All right. For the audience, we're probably going to do one or two more questions, and then I would like to switch over to Q&A questions. Like I said, either use the Q&A function, or if you need, you can put them in the chat as well. My next question, Cam, is what are some current elected officials, either locally or nationally, that you view as models or you would relate to?
Interesting. I don't necessarily think about that a lot. I think that there are some leaders that are doing good work. I think that there's in Congress, there's some significant leaders. I think there's a lot of work that Representative Omar is doing that is very admirable and powerful. I think AOC is somebody that I look at as having some strong leadership. I know that there's a lot of the initiatives Bernie Sanders was working on I really appreciated. One of the things that was nice about Bernie for the longest time was that he also was kind of outside of the two-party system like me, and that he was a good leader in that way. There are certainly significant and other big leaders, and there's things that I have admired about John Lewis and others. I'm trying to think about the state legislature, and there are often there's often legislation coming through that seems really powerful and really strong, even from some of the Minneapolis delegation. I think Aisha Gomez has led on some very good things and very strong legislation that I've appreciated. I also have certainly felt like I was an ally in the past with Karen Clark on things that she was working on. Also, Scott Dibble was, I really appreciated getting to work with both of them as somebody on the steering committee of the Minnesota Families United effort to defeat the anti-gay marriage amendment. And those are some of the people that I look to and have a lot of respect for. And I can look further back in history and find some pretty big rock stars too. And certainly think some of the initiatives of past presidents were something that we could admire and look to, including Franklin Roosevelt.
Thank you. All right, one more question, and then I will turn to the audience submitted Q&As at the moment. This one also refers to an answer submitted through the questionnaire. It asked whether or not you oppose the Upper Harbor Terminal project, and you answered no and gave a subsequent explanation to that. I wanted to ask if you could go into how you have viewed the project thus far and how you see it going forward.
So I'm concerned about the project. It's not in the second ward, and so that's been very interesting. I was concerned originally, and this actually, a lot of this happened before this term. So it seemed like that there was an effort not to think very creatively about it and to go out for kind of a standard request for proposals and end up with a developer who's done a lot of work in Minneapolis getting to lead that effort. And it seemed like we were setting our sights too low and we weren't being innovative and creative enough. And I think that since then, there's been some efforts to change it and broaden it and open it up. And I've tried to be hopeful about a community process. I've tried to weigh in when I could. I think there's a great opportunity to have an amazing park up there that could serve folks and other things that could do a whole lot. I also really think we could have a model of some kind of development that could be even not use fossil fuel and those kinds of things. And I'm not sure that we're reaching far enough to get there. So I'm watching it closely. I'm hoping that things will keep changing and we'll see more community control of more of it. I'm still not really satisfied with what I'm seeing is that it's going far enough. I'd like to see more community ownership or cooperative, collective ownership of more aspects of it and make sure that it is serving the community and is a resource for the community up there. Does that answer your question, or are there more specifics I could get into?
I think that goes into what I was getting at. And I think since we have some audience questions that have come in now, that it would be good to turn to those and get some of those answered. Okay.
Great.
So first one that has come in, this also refers to the questionnaire, and they would like to reiterate the question. Do you unequivocally say that there is no situation that you would vote for to increase police funding?
Yes. I'm not interested in increasing funding for police.
Thank you. The next question If the charter amendment to create a Department of Public Safety controlled by the City Council passes, what would 3 concrete changes that you would push for the council to pass be in order to change how the police department operates?
Wow. Well, I think that first of all, that we should carefully look at the use of force policies, and we should make sure that those are all reviewed and that those are actually approved by the city council. The police have, there's so many policies right now that I think we would have to probably review a lot of those and look at those. And I think that would be a significant opportunity to do that. Of course, there's a lot with creating the new department that goes beyond that as well that we'd have to be looking at. But one of the particular things that I want us to look at immediately is about this less lethal munitions and why those are being used so frequently on protesters. I would probably say immediately we should just ban the use until we can have a more in-depth study and figure out what exactly the policy should be if and whenever they should be used. I think that would be absolutely significant. I also think one of the key things we're going to need to do with a new department too is look at what is the kind of the structure of it overall. I think we want to put a priority on violence prevention. And so I think that we would need to look at investing more significantly in there. And also, I think we should work on a policy for how we can get some kind of a community safety entity that isn't armed law enforcement that could also help do some of that. We could call it patrol that's done. I think there's a real opportunity in the city to expand like an ambassador program like we have downtown. And I know that SEIU is very interested in that. The ambassadors are a member of that union, and some kind of a maybe expanded where there's expanded training. And I think having that kind of presence in commercial corridors of unarmed folks who can be there to support and troubleshoot and problem solve, and also just help and offer assistance would really be a significant move in the right direction. I would also like to see, I don't know if you said 3, did you say 3? Okay, and I'm considering I've said 2 so far. So I would actually also like to see the remaining law enforcement officers participate in more of a community-led restorative justice process so that we could have some kind of a process where they could restore trust in community building. I think one of the problems is law enforcement doesn't really too often, or I don't know how to say this. There's a lot of dehumanizing that goes on, and I think it's time that we try to pull that together and see if we can rebuild trust that way. And it's something that I think could be really helpful. And as we're doing something like that, then incorporate that into how we actually do hiring and training and make sure we have some kind of community involvement along the way during all of that process. Probably for anybody who works in the department, but particularly for anybody who may have that peace officer licensing from the state.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, which has been submitted, I'm not going to ask you. You don't need to answer if you do not want to. The question is, who would you rank as your choices for mayor in the order of preference? I'm going to ask if you are comfortable answering that first.
I'm not sure if I've quite figured it out. And I haven't really officially endorsed anybody for mayor at this point. So I'll say I'm really glad that there are people running against the current mayor, though. And I think I think that that's really important. And I suppose I could say I'll be waiting to see what other organizations do in terms of endorsing and those kinds of things as well. So I guess I'll leave it at that at this point.
Fair enough. The next question we have submitted asks whether or not you are a landlord or if you own any investment properties with tenants.
So I am not currently a landlord, but I have been. I actually own a duplex, and I think it really works great. And I think I would even recommend it. I did have a rental license for a long time before I remarried and blended with someone who had 4 children, and I had 2 other children. So I'm not a landlord right now, but I may go back into being a landlord with my duplex. We're using the whole house right now. I don't have any other properties besides the home that I own, and this is the duplex I just talked about. I think that was all the parts of the question.
Yes. Thank you. The next question we've had come in asks for your thoughts on recent causes of crime in the city, as well as how the city could best respond.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there's sort of a multifaceted causes, and it could be different for all sorts of different people. But I really think one of the problems, and maybe one of the leading problems, is the pandemic and what we did during the pandemic. And we took this approach of it's so dangerous and it could be deadly for us. We need to cut back and we need to do less and we need to be more isolated. And I think then we pulled back a lot on all the programs and services and things we were offering to youth. Typically every summer, the city and the schools, I know the schools because I'm on the youth coordinating board and the park board. I mean, that is really a big thing about what are the summer activities going to be. In fact, that's kind of a little niche that the city can play a bigger role in is out of school time, which includes after school, but it also includes summer. And we have a step up program for youth employment. We have lots of programs that are run generally. And what we did in the pandemic was we closed the parks, we cut back on all those programs, and we hunkered down hoping nobody would get infected. And I think that is something that really contributed to this problem, because I'm sure when we were doing all of that, there were people out there who were marketing other activities. Obviously, the people who were distributing or selling handguns, they weren't staying home and quarantining themselves or being isolated and other things like that. So I really think that contributed. And one of the key things that we're going to have to do is try to, as we open up and as much as we can, and as soon as we can, have more of those activities, and especially for the youth. Actually, if you look at the people involved in carjackings and a lot of those other issues, a lot of them are very young. A lot of them are still juveniles, at least the ones that were arrested, and those things. So that's, I think, what we really will really take some big, important focus. I'm sure there are other causes and other things related. We clearly saw when there was social unrest that there were people taking advantage of those instances to do some pretty organized and significant looting. And I think we have to understand that there are now groups out there that are quick to prey on businesses that have things that can give them a lot of profit. What we saw was lots of targeting of pharmacies, places that sold cigarettes, and liquor stores. And I think there were other ones, but there aren't as many of those other businesses at times. So part of that is, well, how can we make sure that those are safe and protected as well? And we'll see, that's another idea to maybe have that focus there. But I really think it will help when we can have more of those preventative things coming out in the open and for involving our youth, and especially looking at where there might be at-risk youth involved and what we can do to support them and support their families and offer them alternatives to getting involved in criminal activity.
Thank you. All right. The next 2 questions that came in kind of run along the same lines. So to the people who submitted them, I'm going to merge them a bit. The questions are along the lines of what sets you apart from other candidates who are running, and one specifically asks, what are the top 3 issues or qualities that you have over other candidates who are running in Ward 2?
So I guess I can try to answer those two together, and I'm not sure about have over the other candidates. That's an interesting way to say it, but I understand that. But I can talk more about what I bring here that I think could be significant and what I'm talking to people about at the doors. I think one thing about me is you can look back at my record on the council, and I have a proven track record of fighting for and standing up for progressive issues, if you want to say, or green issues, or I think issues that are in line with DSA. I was a leading voice and someone who fought really hard for the working families agenda. And that's what it was called originally, that included the minimum wage. And that was a very big challenge. And I was willing to be on board and supportive when I was the only council member who decided that was something we should champion and run on. And of course, I pushed hard against our city attorney when they ruled the charter amendment out of order, and I was one of 2, I think, votes against that, but then also use that to leverage the council to write our own ordinance and get that done. And I think you can look across the board on many issues and you can see how I'm willing to be a champion. I also think I have a proven record of collaborating with others. In fact, that's the way that I can get things done. And maybe that also means that it's a record of being strategic so that I can be effective. There were many people who were concerned that, oh, you're outside the major 2 parties, you're never going to be able to get anything done or work with anybody. And I think that I can. And one of the things that I've been able to do is really take my values. And I think the fact that I have such clear values that I ran on and people know I govern on and people know that I use to guide my work, which includes social and economic justice, sustainability, grassroots democracy, and peace and nonviolence. They have heard me say that. They've seen me govern with those as my values. And so that adds to my dependability. But it also means then when there's a group and there's a interest and there's advocates and there's community, and it could be a few people on a block, or it can be a large organization of folks who are saying we should do this. If they align with my values, I know that that's where I should partner with and that we can make much more progress there. I am willing to be kind of the connector inside City Hall, the one who will open the door to some of the most unpopular ideas. The local foods movement was very unpopular with my colleagues when I was willing to take that on and realize, well, having healthy local foods grown right here, that's good for the environment, it's good for our health, and it's good for everybody. And as it became popular, we made really big progress with that. I was the council member who ran on and then was saying, I think we could own and run our own utility companies. We should municipalize these. It's ridiculous that they're owned by a private for-profit monopolies. And we didn't get as far as I wanted with that. At least we didn't get there yet. And that's another thing. I'm consistent and I'm willing to revisit these things to make progress. But we were able to actually make a lot of progress on that. And I think you can look across a variety of areas and see what collaborator that I am. I also think that I have a real passion and concern and care for Minneapolis and for the people of Ward 2. I've lived in several neighborhoods in Ward 2. I've raised my family here. I grew up in Minneapolis, and I think I understand the people and know the people of Ward 2. And I also think that I am willing and able to be a voice for my constituents. I understand they won't always agree with everything that I'm doing, but I also understand that in order to make the most progress, we have to keep seeking that kind of consensus, and we have to keep working together to find it. And generally speaking, when we listen to each other, we can find out what are the next steps where we actually have consensus to make that progress. And I am committed. I consider it, almost a sacred honor that I am the voice for all of my constituents. And even when there's more than one opinion on that, I get to share that with government and I get to represent that as best as I could, even as I'm building us towards a consensus to move forward. So it's an interesting kind of leadership where a lot of it is following and a lot of it is making sure that people are coming along. So it's not just leading. And I think those are some of the things that I can bring to this campaign that maybe make me unique. And I probably don't know enough about my opponents to really compare in all those aspects, but those are some of the things that I think that I bring to the race.
Thank you. The next question, I feel like your answer may run along the same lines as the last one. They ask essentially what makes you the best choice for Ward 2 compared to other candidates. The specific example they give is one candidate with organizing experience who is a woman of color.
Well, I think I probably answered the question about why I'm running and what I bring to it. I'm not sure if I have any more to elaborate with that. I think it's fantastic that more people are running. I think that's good for democracy and it's healthy. You know, I decided to run for re-election in 2019, and people decided to also run, and I think that that's good, and that we can, in some ways, doing this support each other. But I'll make my case, and the voters will decide, I guess, who will be representing them. And I think I elaborated way too much in my last answer about what I'm bringing to this race for Ward 2. Is that sufficient answer, you think?
Yes, thank you. All right. The next question, what are your thoughts on the future of the Blue Line extension?
Well, I'm a big advocate for transit and public transit and for light rail and bus rapid transit as well. I am worried that these things take so long. I actually didn't necessarily like the route that was chosen before for going through North Minneapolis. And I'm hopeful that we'll find a route now that may serve more directly. I was actually very involved in the Green Line when it went through Ward 2, and it goes right down University Avenue, which was a major commercial corridor. And I've been able to see how well that actually works. I'm sure that it isn't as fast as it could be if it was a subway system, and I did actually want part of it to go underground underneath the campus and those stations there, but I think it's turned out to be well used, and it's inspired a lot of economic investment. And so I'm hoping that the Blue Line can do the same. I'm hoping it can be on Broadway potentially, and that it will be a big success.
Thank you. The next question we have asks, what efforts are underway to increase the number of shelter beds?
So one of the things that we did as a council that I authored was looking at our shelter ordinances again and making sure we could allow them in more places. This has actually been a rather long journey, and I've done 2 different amendments to the emergency shelter and overnight shelter ordinances so that we could allow them in more places. The spacing requirement now is almost completely gone. There was a big spacing requirement, so they couldn't be all close together for a long time. Most recently, we also, in addition to doing that, we also allowed them in industrial areas so that they were able to actually build up that, put them in a near downtown. There's a warehouse now where they have tiny homes. People have probably heard about that. So it's indoor tiny homes in a warehouse so that there's a bigger community space there involved. I mean, I'm sure it probably has issues, but it's really gives a little more privacy and a little more security to folks there, because it's not just the number of shelter beds. It's also the way that they're run. A lot of people don't want to even go there, and they can't go there, for example, if you have a pet in a lot of these shelters, most of them, or doesn't really work if you have a couple in those things. So we're also trying to see if we can, and those aren't because of city rules. So those are shelter rules that are put in place. So we've also been getting more flexible with our funding. So there was a long time the city didn't want to spend any money on operations of shelters. I was able to get us to change that in this term recently, so that we're actually putting money into operations now. And that's what actually allowed that tiny home indoor village to open, was because they got some operating funds to hire a Vivo to manage that and provide services there. My hope is that we'll see more of those. I actually was able to also legalize intentional tiny home villages for outdoors, but it's also what's allowed, and then what people are interested to build, but then it's what there's funding for. And we do have a group that are very interested, and they even have some funds to build some of these intentional community tiny home, I guess they're not calling them villages, but cluster developments, we could call them. And I think that when they find a site they can locate it on, I think we'll be able to also help with funding for that as well. And those are, and I think the county is doing a lot more, and we can push the county to do more and get more state funding. And I think I just also want to say that it isn't just the shelters. So I just want to say another thing that I think we need to do, and I've introduced an ordinance to do this, and I'm hoping that it'll get passed this year, is allow more rooming houses or single room occupancy places to open. So instead of having to go to a shelter, we can actually find more affordable and quality and dignified living arrangements. There are some nonprofits that can operate a rooming house, especially if somebody doesn't need supportive housing services, so they can live independently just fine, so that they could probably afford to rent that room on a disability or social security check. It's deeply affordable, and if you locate it in a good neighborhood where there's grocery store nearby, library, those kinds of things, where there's amenities that people want, it offers a great opportunity for transitional housing, but also could be for long-term housing for people. And some of the suburbs have allowed these to be built, but Minneapolis prevented them and made it illegal to build new rooming houses back in the 60s. And it's time to open that up again. And I think we have a really good opportunity to do that in the next few months. So stay tuned to that.
All right, thank you. The next question we have submitted is, since you are seeking endorsement from Twin Cities DSA, would you consider yourself anti-capitalist?
Yes, I mean, I don't necessarily use that term very much, but I think so. I think the system right now is so severely broken, and capitalism as we know it and define it isn't working, and it's failing us.
All right. Okay. I'm going to say last call for Q&A questions. So get any in if you have another. The next one that was submitted, I believe I'm going to split into two questions just to make sure that the particular points are appropriately addressed. The first part is, what do you feel over the next 2 years that you can accomplish, which you haven't been able to over the course of your term in office?
Well, I think I've talked about a number of those things. And actually, some of the biggest ones are things that I've helped lay the groundwork for. The charter amendment for public safety is something that I was talking about the need for last term. And in 2018, I was the first one that brought forward with Jeremiah Ellison as a co-author a charter amendment to and I think this gives us, I think if that passes, then in the next 2 years we can actualize and kind of realize that and get there. I could also tie that to what I already talked about too with the tenant opportunity to purchase. We've been slowly moving the ship to give more respect, more protections, more help for tenants and renters, and how can we prevent displacement and gentrification. And I think we've got some things that we're already on the cusp of, and one of them is a tenant opportunity to purchase. The other one is rent stabilization. And so it's that I guess they haven't necessarily been accomplished, but we're on the road to accomplishing them. And I think that we can get those things done and a number of other things done too. And I don't want to necessarily go back and talk about the Minneapolis Green New Deal, but I think that could be a very significant package. And those, and the way I'm so confident that we could accomplish those in the next 2 years is because of all the groundwork that's been laid, and how ready we are to make the case and to get that work done. And I'm sure that there's always going to be more work to do after that too. But those are some things that I think we really are really within reach because of the groundwork that we've laid, and I'm excited about bringing that forward.
Thank you. Then the second part of that question asks, what local campaigns do you have, or do you work with, or do you have a direct relationship with? And how do you bring these campaigns into City Hall? How do you, I will assume, bring the movement into City Hall with you?
Yeah, so there's probably a wide number of them, and I would have to say that typically they are helping to develop the policy and helping to engage others to help develop the policy. So, you know, there's Isaiah, there's Take Action Minnesota, there's IX, there's Reclaim the Block, there's Black Visions Collective, and there's Homes for All. And I probably am not going to remember necessarily all of the groups collaborated with, because there's community power, and there's more depending on what the issue is and those things. I know that with some of them, they're like a partner. Sometimes they're an initiator, but then they become a partner, and I become the connector. And usually, what happens is there's times when the council member is meeting with staff and policymakers and getting what the next step should be. And then I can meet with the advocacy group or groups and start helping develop the strategy to kind of, I don't know, work through the process, if you will. And as I come up with a proposal to, all right, we need some expert consultants to come in and advise this, and working with advocates about what are the next steps, even to the point of, well, let's talk about messaging and what can we do there. It's a real, can be a significant and real partnership. I am always working more to find ways that I can co-govern, and it does go from the smallest little piece of what's happening on somebody's block in terms of that to the biggest kind of issues like how are we responding to the complete I don't know what failure of our public safety system that we have now, and how can we respond to that and rebuild from that. And there's been an amazing coalition of groups that have worked around that. And sometimes I work with a coalition of other groups that are there and at the table working together and facilitated maybe by another group. So that's a role sometimes Isaiah or Take Action has certainly played. And then when I have I will go out and I will reach out to have meetings and have one-on-one different meetings. So right now I'm rewriting the police oversight ordinance. And so I have partnered with past director of the Legal Rights Center, with CUA Communities United Against Police Brutality member, somebody who's on the Police Oversight Commission to kind of develop a framework. I've met with the NAACP president, and hopefully I can bring that to their committee. So I end up like going on the road as a to get the feedback and see what people's interests are which I've also done many times to business associations and neighborhood groups as well over other issues, so that it can be a large community process, collaborative and co-governing, and then being willing to change the policy and find something. It's a little bit like what I was talking about before about trying to find the consensus too. And so that where do we really have the support and the willingness to go forward? And those are some of the current ones, and there has certainly been large partnerships in the past for a lot of the other work that I've done as well.
Thank you. Just for the audience, I'm going to say that the questions that we have should take us to the end. So I'm going to close the question submission. Then the person who answered the last, or who asked the last one, I believe was aiming for something specific, so they sent a follow-up. Do you have relationships within Twin Cities DSA groups?
Not as good as I should have, and I'm not even, so no, I don't know that I understand what the groups are. So I would really appreciate some help building those relationships with the groups. The way the question sounds, there must be some designated subgroups within Twin Cities DSA, and there must be a way to develop relationships. So I'm not attending any subcommittee and committee meetings, if that's what that means, and I'm not sure that I've necessarily been invited or understand. So I will admit I'm relatively new, but interested and anxious to learn more.
I assume that's what they're getting at. The chapter has things along the lines of a branch devoted to housing or to eco-socialism or such like that is likely what they're getting at. I think we'll move on in that case, though, to the next question. The next question submitted, what are 3 things you believe the council should do to increase protections and build power for workers?
Well, we have made a lot of progress, and I talked about this working families agenda earlier, and we dropped the ball on one piece of that, which I think we should finish up, which is a fair scheduling ordinance. I think that is still a serious problem for workers. We've done a lot on wage theft. We've done the minimum wage, but I think that would be one of the 3 things that I could outline. I also think we need to do more to kind of provide technical assistance and sometimes funding for workers to build cooperatives or collectives. And then also maybe when a business is being sold, help be the vehicle so that they can become the collective to take over that building or business. I also think we can do more to kind of safeguard and protect the right to organize and stand with unions. We do have this new sort of shared economy out there and these more independent contractors. And I think maybe this is a 4th thing, but we have to do more to figure out how we can actually protect them and safeguard them. I think sometimes the independent contractor ends up getting least protected. And so whatever ways we can to protect them, we should try to find those. Sometimes it can even happen through business licensing. I had the privilege and opportunity recently to respond to some business licensing concerns of adult-oriented businesses in Minneapolis. So there's an adult entertainment license that we give, and there were some inspections that revealed some pretty lousy working conditions. And it wasn't, and it's something that I wanted to look at and look into. But what I did was wanted to find out what the workers needed. And we actually got the help of somebody from academia to help do a survey. We also had the work of some organizers who helped to kind of understand what was going on in these businesses from the workers' perspective. And at first I thought, well, getting organized, maybe becoming employees, this could all be really helpful. And it wasn't necessarily that helpful in this instance. It wasn't what the workers wanted to do, but they did want some rules about how the city, through their business license, could prevent management from mistreating them. And I think that we can look at that maybe as a model for what we could do in other independent contractor arrangements, especially when we have business licenses as a tool. And business licensing can be a powerful tool to assist workers. And so we rewrote the ordinance there, and I think it turned out to be pretty powerful and pretty effective. We'll see, and we have to always go back. That was over a year ago now, but I think that's a way to build power for workers, is to say, what do you need from government to help you have more powers and more protections, and let's explore ways we can do that, and we can use our business licensing system to do that potentially with a lot of flexibility.
Thank you. We are at 9 p.m., so I will ask this last question and then I will wrap things up. The last question we had submitted is, do you support a 100% publicly financed election system?
I do, and I've advocated for that for a long time, and I think that it's something that could be really helpful and promising and powerful. I think even some cities are doing it much better than we are, and it turns out they get much different kind of people who are willing and able to run for office. I've always had practices myself where I don't take any PAC money, and I don't take any money from people who have business before the city, and I don't take any money from known developers, and everybody else who runs for that I know of so far, or who's won, who I've worked with, takes money from those sources, and you're almost dependent on it to even run for election. And then it gets a lot harder when you're there, I think, and I don't really know, I've never tested both sides of it, but to not be influenced by those who are giving you those large donations and those developers. And it's interesting, I think really significant piles of money comes from a few significant and wealthy sources, and it's not healthy for our democracy. We'd all be better off putting in, I don't know, a few $100s a year and creating some kind of a fund through our shared system so that we could fund these elections. And thanks so much for all of this. I thought the hour might seem like it went be a long time, but it seems like we used it up well, and I really appreciated the good questions.
And I thank you for taking the time to join us and answer some of our questions. We will be posting this recording in our wiki, so it's available for review and for people to share with comrades who weren't able to attend. We'd also encourage everyone to go and discuss further in the electoral Slack. I'd remind everyone that this was our second Q&A session. We have 6 additional ones scheduled over the next week, so I would encourage people to tune into those or submit questions if they can't attend. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope everyone has a good rest of their evening.
Thank you very much.